Greetings, students. Here's our next exciting art project using simple ingredients from home. This is the final piece. As you can see here, I kind of did a close-up with my photograph, but let's see how we got to that point. All right, so all we're going to start with is a sheet of paper and some Epsom salt if you've got it. You can use sand, you can use table salt, but Epsom salt is pretty much your best bet for this project. Some coffee filters, not many, just a few, a little cup of water, glue stick, and I made a paintbrush by just using a piece of sponge and putting a clothespin on it, as you can see that in the bottom left. And this project I am going to be using watercolor, but if you don't have watercolor, you can use food coloring. If you don't have food coloring, you can actually take sidewalk chalk and pulverize it into powder, mix a little water in with it, and you can kind of get some kind of pastel-y kind of colors. There's other ways to make your own pigments, your own paints, but for now I'm just going to use watercolor for this lesson. So first thing I'm going to do is just put a little generous amount of glue, just a dot of glue on the paper, and stick some coffee filters on there. You can put as many coffee filters on there as you want. I'm just going to put 3 on there, but you could stack them on top of each other, whatever you want. It's up to you. And for my watercolor, for the next step, I want to make sure that I've got some pools of water kind of sitting in the watercolor. So I just soaked up a little bit of water into my sponge and then squeezed a little bit out into each little paint oval. And the reason why I'm doing that is I want the paint to kind of sit in that water and just kind of break up, and that way I don't have to keep mixing my colors or dipping back and forth into the water and into the paint. Just kind of let the paint mix with that water and let it sit in there so that I can just soak it up with my sponge, which that's the next thing I'm going to do, is making sure my sponge is damp and not wet and not too dry. I'm just going to soak up that pool of paint that's in each one of those little ovals, and I'm just going to squeeze the water. I'm going to squeeze the paint and the water out of the sponge and just from way up above and just start dripping it down onto my coffee filters. Now most of it's going to go towards the center of the coffee filter, but over time the filters are going to flatten out. The more drips you add, the more water, the more color you add, they're going to kind of flatten themselves out. Okay, and your paper is going to start getting real damp and real wet, so just try not to move it around. If you try to pick it up or anything, it might tear, because it's obviously the more water you add, the more fragile it gets. So at this point, I feel like I've added plenty of color. If I add too much color, it starts turning to brown. So to avoid that, I just kind of want to step back and say, okay, that's good enough. So got all these pools of water that are on the paper. So what I'm going to do now is take that Epsom salt. Again, you can use table salt or sand or anything like that, just anything that's absorbent. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drizzle that Epsom salt, just take a big old pinch of it and just kind of, portion it out all over the paper. And that Epsom salt's going to actually kind of soak up a lot of that water. And when it does soak up the water, it's going to break up the pigment, and it's going to leave these cool little water lines. So not only does it kind of dry it up a little bit quicker, but it also kind of adds a little more pizzazz to the artwork. And so kind of around this point, you can put the artwork in the sun to dry. You can use a hair dryer, or just let it sit out for a few hours. But what you want to do is kind of ensure that everything has dried. Your paper is dry, your coffee filters are dry, and you should be able to kind of dust off the remaining Epsom salt that's on there. And be careful when you're doing this, because the coffee filters at this time are kind of being held to the paper by a little bit of glue and maybe some water cohesion, but they can easily rip up or tear up. So you want to be real careful when you're dusting off that Epsom salt. Okay, and then, you could leave it like this, but I decided to just trim up the edges. I know they look a little jagged, but if I really wanted to, I could, cut my paper. I could trim up those edges a little bit, but it's pretty good for me for now, and I'm pretty happy with that. And I took a close-up picture. That's the final piece. So really, you could kind of ask yourself, is this a painting project or is this a photography project? Because here I am creating this work of art, but yet by taking that very close-up picture, it looks a lot more interesting. It looks a lot like just really cool, I could print that out on a really nice color printer and have that be my art piece. Maybe if I'm making a website, I could use this as one of my background images. Maybe if I'm doing a slideshow or a presentation, this could just be a background that I can use, or Photoshop or something. So the artwork you've created, you made it from real materials, but when you take a picture of something, it becomes a digital artwork. And something else I did, I put this on a tracing table, which has a lot of light. It's basically a table that's lit by a bulb. By putting that on top, you can actually see a lot more detail and dusting and lines that are kind of hidden in the artwork. So you can see the difference, without the light table, with the light table. And again, this acts as a background. This picture can be a background for something. I could print it out. A lot of cool ways you can use this. But I just wanted to show the examples of how you create something like this, and this is the standalone art piece that you can keep, or take a really interesting photograph of it, print it out, use it digitally, make it into a website background, anything like that. But just using very simple ingredients, we made a really cool artwork and actually kind of ventured into some digital art on this project. So I really hope you like this one, and if you guys want to leave me some comments, go ahead, and I will see you next time.